It has now come to light that on October 13th, 2025, the interstellar visitor designated as 3I Atlas purportedly transmitted a signal not through audible sound or radio waves, but via light, pulsating in a cadence too refined to be accidental. These pulses mirrored the same profound numerical sequence, the golden code, observed in the vast celestial arrangements of galaxies, the unfurling of a sunflower's petals, and indeed, the very blueprint of existence itself. Yet, as these rhythmic pulses commenced, our orbital monitoring stations abruptly ceased transmission, camera feeds went dark, and official records concerning the event were expunged. Was this a fortuitous malfunction or a deliberate act? Please remain with me until the conclusion, as we may have just received a communication from beyond, and the encoded message might hold the very revelation humanity has yearned for across centuries. If these perplexing enigmas have you as enthralled as they have me, consider expressing your engagement with a like, and subscribe to ensure you don't miss a solitary unveiling as this narrative unfolds in real time. Kindly inform me in the comments section from your vantage point of viewership, the current time in your locale, and whether you believe we are privy to the unvarnished truth or merely the curated version presented to us. Furthermore, if you wish to bolster the growth of this discerning community, disseminate this video across X, Facebook, Reddit, or even within your private correspondences. Your engagement serves as the vital energy propelling this quest for verity. My sincere gratitude for your unwavering support. Part 1. The Numerical Echo. On the 13th of October 2025, an occurrence transpired that eluded the notice of the majority of the global populace. The date itself resonates with profound significance for those attuned to cosmic synchronicities and historical reverberations. It precisely marks 108 years since 70,000 individuals convened in Fatima, Portugal, and bore witness to what they described as the sun performing an celestial dance. However, our focus today is not on marvels from 1917, at least not primarily. We convene now because on that very anniversary, an interstellar visitor may have communicated with us through the sole idiom capable of transcending cultural, biological, and planetary origins: mathematics. According to the diligent research of David Sereda, the celestial body in question, 3I Atlas, executed an action entirely uncharacteristic of comets and asteroids. It emitted pulses not erratically, not chaotically, but in a sequence of such exactitude that despite these findings remaining uncorroborated by NASA or other authoritative bodies, they have indeed sent waves of intrigue through the astronomical community. 5 pulses, followed by 8, then 13. If you possess any familiarity with the principles of mathematics or the inherent patterns within nature, these numbers should invariably prompt a heightened state of awareness. This is none other than the Fibonacci sequence, the indelible mathematical signature discernible in everything from the spiraling architecture of a nautilus shell to the precise arrangement of seeds within a sunflower. Each successive numeral is the aggregate of the two preceding it: 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so forth, extending into perpetuity. Let me emphasize the singularity of this anomaly. As comets approach the sun, they undergo sublimation. Their icy composition transforms directly into gas. Eruptions of this vaporized material stream outward, their direction dictated by the object's rotational motion and its constituent makeup, further influenced by solar thermal radiation. These expulsions are inherently disordered, irregular, governed by physical laws that bear no resemblance to a meticulously orchestrated temporal progression. Natural celestial bodies adhere to the fundamental principles of thermodynamics and orbital mechanics. They do not engage in numerical computation, they do not encode messages, and they certainly do not selectively extract specific figures from a sequence that humanity has recognized as exceptional for millennia. And yet, if Sarada's observations accurately reflect reality, this is precisely the behavior exhibited by 3I Atlas. The Fibonacci sequence transcends mere mathematical curiosity. It is intrinsically woven into the very fabric of natural morphogenesis. The ratio derived from adjacent numbers within the Fibonacci series converges upon phi, the golden ratio, approximately equal to 1.618. This remarkable constant manifests itself ubiquitously. It dictates the proportions of the human physique, the grand architectural design of galaxies, the intricate branching patterns of arboreal life, and the elegant curves of cyclonic storms. Ancient civilizations employed its principles in the construction of their sacred edifices, while Renaissance artists integrated it into their compositions to achieve unparalleled masterpieces. Biologists observe its presence in the helical structure of DNA and in the dynamics of population growth. If one were intent on establishing communication with an alternate intelligence across the unfathomable void of space, leveraging the Fibonacci sequence would constitute a stroke of genius. It represents a fundamental pattern that any technologically advanced civilization would invariably discover through their own empirical observations of their environment. This is precisely the kind of signal that CT researchers have earnestly anticipated for decades. Not a random effusion of electromagnetic noise, but something inherently structured, demonstrably intentional, and unequivocally artificial. Prime numbers have long been considered the most plausible candidates for an inaugural interstellar message, owing to their intrinsic inability to arise from natural, repetitive patterns. However, the Fibonacci sequence might possess an even greater communicative potency. It conveys a message of comprehension. We understand growth, recursion, and the very mathematics that govern living systems. It proclaims, "We have observed the spiral forms and recognized the identical numerical relationships that you perceive." It serves as an amicable overture across the cosmic expanse, articulated in a lexicon predating any human utterance. However, it is at this juncture that the narrative assumes a more peculiar trajectory, marking the commencement of our investigative endeavor. Contemporaneous with these purported pulses, NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory, as reported, entered an unscheduled operational pause for maintenance. Its data stream abruptly ceased, its telemetry cut off. Nor was this an isolated incident of signal cessation. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's high-resolution imaging science experiment, HiRISE camera, one of our most sophisticated observational instruments directed at another planet, had fallen silent precisely 2 weeks prior, on October 1st, 2025. The Psyche spacecraft encountered a communications interruption spanning from September 1st through the 5th. 3 distinct instrumental systems, 3 separate mission endeavors, all experienced disruptions in data acquisition during the precise temporal window when an interstellar object was potentially transmitting mathematical data towards us. Is this mere coincidence? Equipment malfunctions are a commonplace occurrence in the operational sphere of space exploration. Instruments are subject to the ravages of time. Electronic components degrade under the relentless assault of radiation in the unforgiving environment beyond Earth's protective magnetosphere, and scheduled maintenance periods must be reserved months in advance. Any one of these interruptions considered in isolation carries no inherent significance. However, the convergence of all 3 within such a narrowly defined temporal proximity, coinciding with an event that could potentially represent the most profound discovery in human history, renders the observed pattern significantly more challenging to disregard. We are either observing an unprecedented confluence of adverse fortune in recent space exploration, or a deliberate decision was made by an undisclosed entity to obscure our perception of unfolding events. The The chronological sequence itself narrates a story, albeit one whose ultimate meaning remains enigmatic. September 1st, Psyche experiences a communications blackout. October 1st, High-Rise ceases to transmit imagery. October 13th, the Fatima anniversary, the alleged Fibonacci pulses, and the STO blackout. Each subsequent day marked by a falling domino, each blackout representing an irretrievable loss of observational data. In the pursuit of scientific understanding, we are trained to operate with the available evidence, to construct theoretical frameworks based on empirical data, and to adapt these frameworks as new information emerges. But what recourse do we have when the very evidence upon which we rely is systematically withheld? What course of action do we adopt when the instruments charged with observation become incapacitated at the most critical juncture? This is the pivotal inquiry that we shall jointly undertake, and it is not a comfortable one. It necessitates the acknowledgement that our investigation may extend beyond merely elucidating what transpired to comprehending what we were actively prevented from witnessing. It demands consideration of the possibility that the most significant transmission in human history arrived as scheduled, was duly detected, and subsequently deliberately sequestered from public scrutiny. Alternatively, it compels us to accept our inherent predisposition as pattern-seeking entities, so profoundly desirous of meaning that we construct elaborate narratives from mere coincidences and instrumental failures. Both propositions are disquieting, and both warrant rigorous examination. Furthermore, each path leads us deeper into a labyrinth of mystery that intertwines mathematics, history, mythology, physics, and the very essence of our epistemological frameworks concerning reality. The numerical constituents, 5, 8, 1, 3, linger suspended in the ambient consciousness, akin to an inquiry posed in a language we are only just beginning to decipher. Emanating from this numerical utterance is a cascade of implications that will transport us from the interstellar cosmos to the realm of subatomic physics, from the poetic verses of the medieval era to the sophisticated intricacies of artificial intelligence, and from the Martian surface to the sun's incandescent orbital path. This is the chronicle of a visitor from beyond our solar system, a narrative centered on the interplay of pattern and meaning, on the chasm that separates our direct observations from the information we are provided, and on the tantalizing possibility that on a singular October afternoon, while the vast majority of humanity was engrossed in mundane diversions and preoccupied with quotidian concerns, the universe leaned in intimately and divulged a secret that we narrowly averted missing. Part 2. A lexicon inscribed in spirals. You have likely encountered the Fibonacci sequence numerous times without realizing its inherent presence. Observe any sunflower head, and you will discern two sets of spiraling patterns, one progressing clockwise and the other counterclockwise. Meticulous enumeration will reveal that the counts correspond to consecutive Fibonacci numbers, 21 and 34, or 34 and 55, or 55 and 89, depending on the specific species. The seeds arrange themselves in this precise configuration because it represents the most spatially efficient method of packing, enabling the maximum number of seeds to occupy the available area. This optimal arrangement is not a learned behavior for evolution. Rather, the underlying mathematics is intrinsically embedded within the physics of natural growth. The chambered nautilus constructs its shell following a perfect logarithmic spiral that meticulously adheres to the golden ratio. Each successive chamber is proportionately larger than the preceding one, thereby engendering that iconic curve that has become synonymous with natural perfection. Even hurricanes exhibit a spiraling motion governed by the same mathematical principles. Galaxies unfurl their arms in grand, golden spirals encompassing billions of stars. These proportional relationships are strikingly evident in the human visage. The measured distance between your chin and your eyebrows, when compared to the distance from your eyebrows to the apex of your head, approximates the value of phi. The bones within your fingers, extending from the palm to the tip, diminish in length in accordance with the golden ratio. We are, quite literally, architected from this inherent pattern. This profound prevalence is precisely why SETI researchers have consistently posited that any deliberately transmitted interstellar signal would likely incorporate either prime numbers or Fibonacci sequences. These are not arbitrary human constructs. They represent fundamental mathematical truths that exist independently of their discovery. An extraterrestrial civilization residing on a planet orbiting a star 30 light-years distant would independently ascertain the identical Fibonacci sequence that we recognize, as it is an intrinsic property of spiral growth and efficient spatial arrangement. They would encounter the golden ratio within their own biological frameworks, their planetary geologies, and their galactic structures. If the objective is to extend a greeting to an entity that has evolved under a different stellar influence, speaking a language utterly foreign to human articulation, mathematics emerges as the most judicious choice. Numbers are devoid of biochemical or cultural bias. 5 plus 8 invariably equates to 13, irrespective of celestial location. This brings us back to David Serida's assertion regarding 3I Atlas. According to his observational data, the object emitted a series of 5 pulses, succeeded by 8, followed by 13, and then a cessation of all transmissions. This represents a remarkably astute selection if the intent was to craft a message. The sequence is sufficiently prolonged to be undeniably deliberate, yet concise enough to be readily repeatable and recognizable. It avoids overwhelming the recipient with an excessive volume of data, instead offering a succinct and elegant proof. The message effectively conveys, "I comprehend recursion and the mathematics underpinning natural growth. I am confident that you will recognize these numbers, as any civilization possessing observational instruments and mathematical understanding will have inevitably encountered them." With this initial recognition secured, the implicit expectation is that the recipient will now be keenly observing for subsequent transmissions. Contrast this with the expected behavior of natural celestial bodies. When a comet traverses the vicinity of the Sun, solar radiation induces the sublimation of its icy core, converting ice directly into gas. This outgassing process generates plumes of material that stream away from the nucleus, forming the characteristic tail that invariably points away from the Sun, irrespective of the comet's direction of travel. These emissions are inherently chaotic, influenced by the comet's rotational velocity, its material composition, and the subsurface distribution of icy deposits. Occasionally, a comet may exhibit multiple jets, or these jets might pulsate rhythmically as the object rotates, bringing different regions into proximity with the Sun. However, these phenomena do not produce distinct, countable pulses arranged in a mathematically significant sequence. Such an outcome would necessitate precise timing, controlled execution, and an explicit intention. This is where a degree of tempered skepticism is warranted. The entirety of the preceding description hinges upon Serida's observations and interpretations. These claims have not yet received official verification from NASA, the European Space Agency, or any other recognized astronomical authority. No peer-reviewed scientific publication has substantiated the existence of a Fibonacci pulse sequence. We lack multiple independent observers reporting congruent phenomena. It is imperative to bear this crucial caveat in mind. Scientific progress is not predicated upon singular assertions made by individual researchers, however compelling the narrative may appear. Advancement is driven by reproducible observations and data that can be subjected to examination and verification by multiple research teams. In the absence of such corroboration, we operate within the realm of intriguing hypotheses rather than established scientific fact. However, the inherent value of compelling hypotheses lies precisely in their potential for veracity. The lack of official affirmation does not invalidate an observation. It signifies that we are situated within the disquieting interval between initial detection and conclusive verification, between observing something and definitively understanding its nature. History is replete with instances of groundbreaking discoveries that commenced with a solitary observer noting an anomaly, something that deviated from established models, who then dedicated years to persuading the broader scientific community to accord it due consideration. Galileo's observation of Jovian moons, Henrietta Leavitt's identification of patterns in variable stars that ultimately enabled cosmic distance measurement, and Fritz Zwicky's prescient proposal of dark matter based on galactic velocity discrepancies, all represent pivotal moments born from individual insight. The pertinent question then becomes, how do we evaluate a claim such as Sarita's when official sources remain silent and crucial data streams are intermittently interrupted? We scrutinize the predictions derived from the claim, assess the potential ramifications if it were to prove true, and ascertain whether the observed pattern remains coherent when examined from multiple perspectives. We question the extent to which the underlying mathematics supports the proposed interpretation. We actively seek corroborating evidence, temporal congruencies, and other anomalies that might collectively point towards an underlying reality. Crucially, we maintain intellectual honesty regarding the limits of our knowledge and the precise demarcation between empirical evidence and speculative conjecture. Pattern recognition is a fundamental survival mechanism for humankind. We evolved to perceive visages in cloud formations, to discern footsteps in the rustling of leaves, and to identify potential predators within ambiguous shadows. While this innate capacity served our ancestral predecessors effectively, it also renders us susceptible to perceiving patterns that may not possess an objective existence. This cognitive inclination is termed apophenia, a concept to which we shall return, as it is vital for comprehending how we might erroneously interpret natural phenomena as deliberately designed signals. Concurrently, it is equally important to acknowledge that if an intelligence were intent on communication, it would strategically design a signal to capitalize on our inherent pattern detection capabilities. It would eschew random noise in favor of a transmission that actively engages the pattern recognition circuits within the recipient's cognitive architecture, delivering something both unmistakable and compelling. The sequence 5-8-13 fulfills precisely this role. It is sufficiently elementary to be immediately recognized, yet specific enough to effectively preclude the vast majority of purely natural explanations. If this indeed represents the initial gambit in a scenario of interspecies contact, its design is exceptionally astute. Consequently, we find ourselves positioned between two divergent interpretations, and the only intellectually honest stance is to acknowledge the validity of both. We are either witnessing the remarkable capacity of the human intellect to discern order within chaos and to imbue coincidence with significance, or we are observing the inaugural, deliberate mathematical communique originating from beyond our solar system, strategically timed to coincide with a historically resonant anniversary, and subsequently obscured by an opportune series of instrumental malfunctions. The mathematical principles are irrefutable. The Fibonacci sequence is an established mathematical reality, and the golden ratio demonstrably permeates the natural world and would undoubtedly be recognized by any technologically advanced species. Whether 3I Atlas actually emitted the 5-8-13 pulse sequence on October 13, 2025, remains unverified. However, the question has been posed, and such fundamental inquiries do not simply dissipate, especially when official channels remain reticent. Part 3. Fatima and Atlas, a mirrored reflection across a century. Let us transport ourselves back to October 13th, 1917. Portugal stands 3 years into the throes of the Great War. The nation is depleted, fractured, and apprehensive about its unfolding future. In a modest agricultural locale situated north of Lisbon, three young shepherd children have, for several months, recounted the appearance of a luminous apparition on the 13th day of each month, conveying messages concerning prayer, atonement, and foretelling future occurrences. The Catholic Church, while harboring reservations, found itself drawn to the unfolding narrative. Word of these events spread rapidly. On this particular October day, an assembly estimated to number between 30,000 and 70,000 individuals converged upon a field adjacent to the village of Fatima, many with the fervent hope of witnessing a divine miracle, while a considerable contingent arrived with the explicit intention of discrediting what they perceived as childish fantasy or religious deception. What transpired subsequently has been a subject of enduring debate. Numerous witnesses, encompassing journalists, avowed skeptics, and devout believers alike, reported that following a period of inclement weather, the cloud cover abruptly dissipated, and the sun appeared to engage in an extraordinary celestial performance, exhibiting movements that defied conventional astronomical understanding. The descriptions vary considerably. Some asserted it spun erratically, others that it danced with an otherworldly grace, and still others claimed it plunged precipitously toward the earth before inexplicably regaining its customary position. Hues of color, imbued with an ethereal luminescence, rippled across the celestial canvas. Witnesses described their sodden attire becoming instantly dry amidst a sudden and intense surge of warmth. The phenomenon persisted for approximately 10 minutes, after which the sun resumed its ordinary appearance. To this day, no scientific consensus has been reached to definitively explain the collective experiences of so many individuals, although proposed theories range from mass psychological suggestion to complex atmospheric optical illusions, and even retinal distortion caused by prolonged direct observation of the sun's brilliance. Fast forward precisely 108 years to October 13th, 2025. An object originating from interstellar space, traversing a trajectory that originated from beyond our solar system, purportedly emitted a sophisticated mathematical sequence at the precise moment when Earth's principal solar monitoring satellite experienced a critical system failure and ceased operation. The temporal synchronicity of these dates is not approximate, it is an exact match. Not merely within the same season, nor within a margin of several days, but on the identical calendar anniversary of an event that remains one of the most widely corroborated yet unexplained phenomena of the 20th century. For those inclined to dismiss such occurrences as mere coincidences, this particular alignment may hold little sway. However, for individuals predisposed to discerning patterns and contemplating their potential significance, this demands a thorough and critical investigation. The numerical value 108 carries profound symbolic weight across a multitude of mystical and religious traditions. In both Hinduism and Buddhism, it is regarded as a sacred number. Prayer beads, or malas, utilized in meditation practices, typically consist of 108 beads. The sacred texts of Hinduism, the Upanishads, are enumerated as 108. Similarly, there are said to be 108 names attributed to Buddha. Within the domain of mathematics, the decomposition of 108 reveals 12 multiplied by 9, both of which are numbers that frequently appear in studies of sacred geometry and ancient cosmological frameworks. Furthermore, the approximate distance between the Earth and the Sun is equivalent to 108 times the diameter of the Sun. Likewise, the approximate distance between the Earth and the Moon corresponds to 108 times the diameter of the Moon. Ancient astronomers, devoid of the sophisticated instrumentation available today, recognize these precise proportional relationships, and some scholars contend that this knowledge was deliberately encoded within their architectural designs and mythological narratives. Whether these numerical correspondences possess intrinsic meaning beyond human cognitive pattern, recognition remains a subject of contention. What is undeniable, however, is that the deliberate selection of this specific date for signal transmission, assuming indeed a signal was sent, would optimally enhance its probability of being perceived by a particular segment of humanity, those individuals who meticulously track celestial events, those with a keen interest in SETI research, and those who investigate the intricate nexus between astronomy and historical anomalies. This represents a form of targeted communication. In essence, if an entity sought to establish contact with Earth, but faced the challenge of penetrating the pervasive background noise generated by the countless asteroids, comets, and orbital debris that traverse our solar system annually, strategically timing its message to coincide with a date already imbued with pre-existing significance and firmly embedded within our collective databases and cultural memory would be an exceptionally effective strategy. This approach would establish a profound parallel between past and present, thereby inviting comparative analysis and contemplation. It is within this interpretive framework that we enter territory that elicits significant discomfort among many scientific practitioners. We are venturing into an analytical space that intertwines acclaimed scientific observation with historical religious events, merging astronomical inquiry with mystical interpretation, and allowing narrative construction and the pursuit of meaning to potentially supersede objective analysis. The criticisms leveled against such an approach are both valid and essential. Confirmation bias is a well-documented cognitive phenomenon. Once an individual forms a conviction that a cosmic event is linked to a historical occurrence, they are prone to identifying connections wherever they may arise, imputing significance to details that are, in reality, entirely random. Evidence that contradicts the pre-established pattern is frequently disregarded, while supporting evidence is amplified. This is the very mechanism through which speculative theories proliferate. Pseudo-scientific claims masquerade as genuine discoveries, and authentic enigmas become obscured beneath layers of wishful thinking and unsubstantiated conjecture. However, let us also consider the alternative perspective. Across the expanse of human existence, significant celestial occurrences have been meticulously aligned with cultural timelines by keen observers aiming to leave a profound impression. Ancient spiritual leaders would orchestrate sacred rituals to coincide with eclipses, thereby projecting an aura of mastery over the heavens. Similarly, contemporary space exploration agencies schedule mission launches on dates imbued with symbolic importance. As a civilization, we possess a deep-seated connection to the interplay between cosmic chronology and societal calendars. Should an intelligent entity intend to transmit a message destined for recognition, discussion, and diligent examination rather than being dismissed as mere instrumental static, selecting a date resonant with historical significance would be a strategically brilliant move. Such a choice would effectively generate the very attention and discourse we are currently engaged in. The phenomenon observed at Fatima has never received an official explanation, yet it has also never been definitively categorized as supernatural by any scientific authority. It persists in that ambiguous realm between documented eyewitness accounts and empirically verified phenomena. Thousands of individuals reported witnessing an event, but their descriptions do not align with any known astronomical or atmospheric occurrences. The event slated for October 13th, 2025, occupies a comparable space. An occurrence is alleged to have taken place. The timing is extraordinary, yet official validation remains absent. We are presented with two reflective surfaces, separated by a century, each mirroring mysteries that the other magnifies. Furthermore, we have investigators like Sarita, who are forging connections between these occurrences, constructing a bridge between past and present anomalies. What renders this connection particularly compelling is the apparent level of meticulous planning involved. a feat that seems almost unfathomable. If the celestial body known as 3 Atlas is a natural object following a gravitational trajectory established eons ago when it was expelled from its parent system, how could its arrival possibly be synchronized with human calendrical dates and religious observances? The answer is, it could not. Not unless its trajectory was deliberately altered. Not unless the object is not adhering to a natural course, but rather a designed path, precisely calculated to reach our sun on a specific date with sufficient accuracy to instigate this very conversation. The degree of control required, the extensive planning timeline, and the profound comprehension of human culture necessary to designate October 13th as a target date all point towards an intelligence that has been observing us for an extended period. Alternatively, it suggests that our aptitude for pattern recognition is so advanced that we can transform a random cosmic event into a narrative that resonates with meaning, even when such meaning is not inherently present. Both hypotheses are currently under consideration and merit thorough investigation. What we cannot afford to do is dismiss this coincidence without careful scrutiny, simply because it makes us uneasy, nor can we readily accept it as irrefutable evidence merely because it feels significant. The reflective parallel exists. 108 years separate two instances of October 13th. One was witnessed by thousands in a Portuguese field. The other was purportedly detected by instruments monitoring interstellar space. Whether this reflective parallel illuminates fundamental truths or merely mirrors our innate desire to find significance in the cosmos is the central question that will guide the remainder of our inquiry. Part 4. The Blackouts and the Missing Eyes. Data serves as the vital essence of modern astronomical research. We no longer ascertain the existence of planets by gazing through telescopes. Instead, we identify them by analyzing vast quantities of light, curved data acquired from orbital observatories. We do not detect asteroids by scanning the night sky with our naked eyes. Rather, we locate them through automated surveys that photograph the entirety of the visible heavens at regular intervals and employ algorithms to identify any movement between exposures. Every significant discovery in recent decades has emerged from colossal datasets meticulously processed by computers, ranging from the detection of gravitational waves to the comprehensive mapping of the cosmic microwave background. When this flow of data is disrupted, we are rendered effectively blind, and the universe continues its inherent processes unobserved by us. Let us construct a chronological sequence of the communication interruptions that occurred proximate to our October 13th, 2025 event. Initially, we have the Psyche mission, a spacecraft dispatched to investigate a metallic-rich asteroid situated in the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. From September 1st through September 5th, Psyche experienced a complete communications blackout. NASA attributed this interruption to a safe mode activation triggered by its internal systems, a standard precautionary measure implemented when an anomaly occurs, requiring the spacecraft to stabilize before resuming normal operations. This represented 5 days of severed communication during a critical alignment period when Earth, Mars, and several other solar system bodies were positioned in rare geometrical configurations. Subsequently, we have the HiRISE camera, an instrument aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. HiRISE stands as one of the most sophisticated cameras ever dispatched by humanity to another planet, capable of discerning features less than a meter in size from orbit. It has provided us with breathtaking, high-resolution imagery of Martian canyons, polar ice caps, dust devils, and potential landing sites for future endeavors. According to the research conducted by David Sarita, the HiRISE camera ceased functioning on October 1st, 2025. The official explanation cites a malfunction within the electronics unit responsible for CCD Red 4, one of the camera's imaging sensors, an issue that reportedly began to deteriorate in August of 2023 and ultimately failed completely by October of 2025. The camera has not transmitted any images since. Following this, on October 13th, the Solar Dynamics Observatory, NASA's primary satellite for real-time solar monitoring, went offline for what was described as scheduled maintenance. The transmission ceased for several hours during the precise window when 3i Atlas would have been at its most active, most visible, and potentially emitting the purported Fibonacci pulses. Our most advanced solar observation platform was rendered inoperable. The precision of this timing is sufficient to prompt speculation as to whether the maintenance schedule was as routine as presented, or if some other factor necessitated the instrument's deactivation at that specific juncture. 3 distinct systems, on 3 separate missions, all encountered data gaps during the narrow period when an interstellar object was traversing the inner solar system and potentially engaging in extraordinary activity. If one considers any of these incidents in isolation, it appears as a commonplace technical failure, the kind that routinely occurs in the demanding environment of space. Electronics malfunction, cameras degrade, and maintenance is scheduled. However, when 3 such events are clustered together within the same brief temporal window, coinciding with an occurrence that some researchers propose signifies first contact, the statistical probability begins to appear unusual. Not impossible, but sufficiently peculiar to warrant a more in-depth examination of precisely what transpired and the underlying reasons. Instrument failures in space are indeed common occurrences. The radiation environment beyond Earth's magnetosphere is exceedingly hostile. Solar particles and cosmic rays relentlessly bombard spacecraft electronics, gradually degrading components over months and years. Extreme temperature fluctuations place significant stress on materials. In direct sunlight, surfaces can reach hundreds of degrees Celsius, while in shadow, they plummet to hundreds of degrees below zero. These cycles of expansion and contraction ultimately lead to cracked solder joints and stressed circuit boards. When a spacecraft designed for a 5-year mission ultimately operates for 15 years, failures become not merely likely, but virtually inevitable. This is considered normal and expected. Engineers incorporate redundancy precisely because they anticipate component failures. However, there exists a distinction between random technical malfunctions and coordinated communication blackouts. Random failures are expected to be distributed randomly over time. One would anticipate instrument problems to correlate with age, with older systems failing more frequently than newer ones. One would also expect them to correlate with solar activity, with an increase in failures during periods of high radiation. What one would not expect is for multiple unrelated systems to fail within days of each other during the same narrow temporal window, unless an external factor was simultaneously impacting all of them. And if an external factor was affecting them, what could it have been? A solar storm that somehow went unrecorded? A gravitational wave passing through the inner solar system? Or deliberate action by an entity seeking to prevent certain observations from being made? This is where speculative theories can rapidly escalate, and it is imperative to exercise caution. There is no publicly available evidence suggesting that NASA or any other space agency intentionally disabled instruments to suppress data concerning 3i Atlas. The agencies have provided technical explanations for each blackout, explanations that align with the typical operational parameters of space missions. To accuse them of a cover-up without concrete proof is not only irresponsible, but also toxic to productive discourse, thereby hindering the investigation of legitimate anomalies. Nevertheless, it is also true that space agencies have a documented history of classifying data, delaying releases, and withholding images and observations until they can be thoroughly analyzed and validated. A notable example is the case of the missing Apollo 11 tapes. For decades, the highest quality video footage of the moon landing was lost, not due to a conspiracy, but rather to bureaucratic negligence and inadequate archival practices. What we can assert with certainty is that the absence of data engenders ambiguity, and ambiguity creates fertile ground for speculation. Had the high-rise camera been operational and captured images of 3I Atlas during this period, we would possess high-resolution photographs capable of confirming or refuting unusual activity. Had the Solar Dynamics Observatory been actively recording, we would have a complete dataset of solar activity during the alleged pulse sequence, enabling independent researchers to identify correlations or anomalies. In the absence of such data, we are left with second-hand accounts, individual observations that cannot be cross-referenced, and a growing perception that something significant may have transpired just beyond the threshold of what we are permitted to witness. Amateur astronomers attempted to bridge this information gap, with some claiming to have observed unusual activity in proximity to 3I Atlas. However, amateur equipment lacks the resolution and sensitivity of orbital platforms. Ground-based observation is subject to atmospheric distortion, light pollution, adverse weather conditions, and the inherent limitation that small, distant objects reveal minimal detail even through substantial telescopes. The professional scientific community possesses the requisite instruments, and during the critical window, those instruments were either directed elsewhere, powered down, or returning blank data. Whether by accident or by design, we missed the opportune moment for verification. In scientific endeavors, negative results are customarily published. If an experiment yields no conclusive findings, that outcome constitutes valuable information, informing other researchers that their efforts to replicate the work are unnecessary and aiding in the process of narrowing down the locus of the actual answer. However, in astronomy, the absence of data is not equivalent to negative results. It signifies a complete lack of findings. It means the question remains unresolved, hanging in the air, inviting continued conjecture and investigation. And when multiple instruments simultaneously cease functioning, this absence begins to appear less like a coincidence and more like something systematic, something coordinated. We do not yet know what that something is, but the pattern compels us to inquire. Part 5. The hyperdimensional model emerges. This juncture in our investigation leads us into territory that the majority of mainstream scientists would likely disavow. It is crucial to state this unequivocally from the outset. What I am about to describe does not constitute accepted astrophysics and has not undergone peer review. It resides within the speculative fringes where mathematical principles intersect with mystical concepts, where cosmic observations are interpreted through frameworks that blend scientific inquiry with angelology, and where the boundary between discovery and invention becomes so indistinct that one's footing becomes uncertain. Nevertheless, this is the framework that David Charita employs to interpret the three-eyed object, and comprehending it is essential to understanding his assertions regarding the significance of the Fibonacci sequence. Charita posits what he terms the hyperdimensional solar system model, or HDS-SM. Within this model, our solar system encompasses concealed dimensions and orbital configurations that correspond not only to physical planets, but also to energetic realms and metaphysical orders. He assigns numerical values to these positions. The number 5 represents Earth, our home planet, and serves as the anchor point for human observation. The number 8 corresponds to what he designates as Planet 591, identified with the Dominions, one of the 9 orders of angels found in medieval Christian cosmology. 13 maps to the virtues, another angelic order, which he associates with the biblical figure Methuselah, reputed to have lived for 969 years. If your skepticism is now sharply heightened, that is an entirely appropriate reaction. We have ventured beyond observational astronomy and entered a domain of symbolic mapping, where numbers have been assigned to abstract metaphysical concepts, and these concepts are then projected back onto physical space to construct a model that defies conventional scientific testing or falsification. This is the hallmark of pseudoscience, the conflation of genuine observations with untestable assertions to build an explanatory structure that, while appearing comprehensive, is incapable of making verifiable predictions or being disproven by empirical evidence. Despite this, individuals who construct such models often commence with legitimate questions and perplexing anomalies. They endeavor to rationalize data that deviates from mainstream explanations, even if their methodologies lack rigorous scientific foundations. In Cerita's interpretation, when three Atlas emitted pulses corresponding to 5, 8, and 13, it was not merely demonstrating familiarity with the Fibonacci sequence, it was referencing the HDSSM itself. The message conveyed was, I am aware of Earth, position 5. I am aware of the dominions at position 8. I am aware of the virtues at position 13. This would imply that the object, or the intelligence directing it, has studied not only human mathematics, but also human cosmological frameworks, including those that exist solely within esoteric texts and fringe research. It would suggest a depth of cultural knowledge far exceeding a mere recognition of our technological status. It would imply that someone has perused our literature, studied our myths, and comprehended the conceptual frameworks through which certain humans perceive reality. This is where the model either becomes exceptionally compelling or utterly preposterous, depending on one's pre-existing beliefs. If one is predisposed to believe that angels exist as tangible entities occupying specific orbital positions within a higher dimensional structure surrounding our sun, then the Fibonacci signal acquires profound theological significance. It would serve as validation that these orders are indeed real, that they can be mathematically mapped, and that an interstellar visitor acknowledged and recognized them. Conversely, if one subscribes to a materialist worldview, considering angels to be mere cultural constructs devoid of physical reality, then this interpretation becomes nothing more than decorative embellishment applied to an observation that may or may not have even occurred. The model is not subject to empirical verification. There is no experiment that can definitively prove or disprove the existence of Planet 591 or its purported association with angelic dominions. However, let us engage with this concept seriously for a moment, not with the intention of accepting it as factual, but because exploring it sheds light on the human propensity to derive meaning from celestial events. Mainstream astrophysics acknowledges 8 planets within our solar system, in addition to dwarf planets like Pluto and an innumerable quantity of asteroids and comets. We have found no evidence of additional major planets in hidden orbits, although the search continues for a hypothetical Planet 9 that might explain certain orbital anomalies observed in the outer solar system. The notion that specific numerical positions exist, designated by hidden intelligences, and that these positions correspond to metaphysical orders rather than gravitational dynamics, is not science. It is cosmology in its ancient sense, a conceptualization of the universe that imbues physical space with spiritual significance. Medieval cosmology functioned precisely in this manner. Dante Alighieri's epic poem, The Divine Comedy, situates Earth at the cosmic center, encircled by concentric spheres representing the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and finally the sphere of fixed stars and the primum mobile, the outermost sphere responsible for imparting motion to all beneath it. Beyond these celestial realms lie the 9 orders of angels and the throne of God. This was a model where physics and theology were inextricably linked, where orbital motion was attributed to angelic agency, and where mathematics served as a means to unveil divine order. Modern scientific inquiry has systematically dismantled that cosmology, replacing it with principles of gravity, inertia, and conservation laws that do not necessitate conscious direction. However, the older model persists within cultural consciousness, continuing to influence how some individuals interpret celestial phenomena. If 3A Atlas is indeed transmitting signals utilizing a framework such as Cerrida's HDSSM, it suggests an intelligence possessing such a profound understanding of human culture that it can reference it, communicating in a lexicon that specific segments of humanity will recognize as meaningful, even if mainstream science dismisses it. This represents a sophisticated form of communication, not a broadcast intended for universal reception, but rather the encoding of messages designed for decryption by particular communities. It is targeted signaling. It is a deliberate choice of audience. And if this is indeed the case, it raises the question of motive. Why would an interstellar intelligence concern itself with medieval angelology? Why reference frameworks that most humans have long forgotten and that science abandoned centuries ago? Unless those frameworks contain an element of truth, something about the fundamental structure of reality that we have overlooked in our relentless pursuit of materialist reductionism. Or, alternatively, unless we are projecting meaning onto random occurrences, perceiving in the cosmos what we already believe, and constructing elaborate interpretations that reveal more about our own psychology than about any objective signal. Both possibilities remain on the table. The hyperdimensional solar system model is not science, but it is a mechanism for meaning-making, and meaning-making is an inherent human activity when confronted with the unknown. We construct models, maps, and frameworks that provide a semblance of understanding, even in the absence of true comprehension. At times, these models lead to groundbreaking discoveries. More often, they lead to unproductive dead ends. The challenge lies in discerning the difference before becoming too deeply invested in an incorrect path. Part 6. Dante's 74-year countdown. In the year 1321, Dante Alighieri completed his monumental work, the Divine Comedy. The third part, entitled Paradiso, recounts his visionary ascent through the celestial spheres, guided by Beatrice, progressing through planetary orbits and angelic hierarchies until he reaches the Empyrean and beholds the divine essence itself. The text is replete with intricate mathematical and astronomical details. Dante possessed a thorough understanding of the scientific knowledge of his era. The Ptolemaic model with Earth at the center, the ratios and harmonies believed to govern planetary movement, and the numerological principles of medieval Christian mysticism. He meticulously encoded these patterns within the structure of his verses, his character selections, and his symbolic geography. Scholars have dedicated 7 centuries to deciphering the layers of meaning within his work, and they continue to uncover new patterns. David Cerrida posits that Dante did not merely describe the cosmos as he perceived it. Rather, he encoded a countdown beginning in 1321, the year Paradiso was completed, to 2025, the projected arrival of 3I Atlas, a period spanning precisely 74 years. This number does not appear within the Fibonacci sequence itself, but Cerrida establishes a connection through other mathematical pathways to cycles he believes govern events. 74 can be factored as 16 multiplied by 4.4. The number 44 appears in various sacred geometry systems. 16 is equivalent to 2 raised to the 4th power. And if one is willing to pursue tangential connections sufficiently far, 74 can be linked to 432 Hz, a frequency that some alternative researchers propose as a universal resonance, the inherent harmonic of the cosmos itself. At this point, it is necessary to pause and acknowledge the nature of our current undertaking. We are taking a number derived from a simple subtraction, 2025 minus 1321, and are subsequently reverse engineering significance by factoring it and seeking correlations with other systems. This is the practice of numerology, not mathematics. Mathematics is concerned with necessary relationships, with equations that remain valid irrespective of manipulation, and with predictions that can be empirically tested. Numerology, conversely, is concerned with sufficient relationships, with finding any conceivable pathway that connects a starting point to a desired endpoint. You perceive patterns simply because you've chosen to see them. Nearly any numerical value can be imbued with significance if one is prepared to manipulate its factors creatively and selectively highlight certain associated meanings. However, let us entertain the notion that the gap of 704 years might indeed hold some significance, not due to mystical numerical properties, but because of its cultural resonance. Should an intelligent entity wish to allude to the cosmological perspectives of Western civilization, Dante Alighieri's Paradiso stands as a monumental achievement, a profound amalgamation of medieval astronomical understanding, theological doctrine, and poetic artistry. This literary masterpiece has endured for 7 centuries, translated into numerous languages, and studied by countless students, firmly embedding itself within the collective cultural memory of societies with European heritage and the wider literate global population. Selecting a 704-year interval from its completion to transmit a message would forge a connection that literary scholars and historians might readily discern, even if astronomers overlooked it. Dante's cosmological framework positions angelic beings within specific celestial spheres encircling the earth. The sphere of the moon is inhabited by angels who faltered in their vows, while Mercury houses those who sought worldly renown for virtuous deeds. Venus is the domain of lovers, the sun, the realm of the wise, and Mars, the sphere of warriors. Jupiter is home to just rulers, and Saturn to contemplative souls. Beyond Saturn, the realm of fixed stars contains the triumphant church, followed by the 3 highest orders of angels, thrones, cherubim, and seraphim. Each of these celestial spheres possesses its own unique mathematical principles, its characteristic music, and its distinct luminescence. This is cosmology envisioned as geometry, space conceived as a meticulously arranged hierarchy of perfections. It presents a model where the physical and spiritual realms coexist within the same locations, allowing for simultaneous traversal of both by ascending in comprehension. Minds of the medieval era found this perspective deeply compelling as it offered explanations for all phenomena: the movements of planets, the functions of angels, the destinies of souls, and the efficacy of prayer. Modern astronomy, however, systematically dismantled this structure. Earth was revealed not to be the center, but rather a planet orbiting the sun. Planets, it was determined, do not require angelic intervention for their motion. Gravity governs their paths. The celestial spheres were shown to be non-existent as physical constructs, with space largely comprising empty vacuum. The stars, far from being affixed to a crystalline firmament, are distant suns akin to our own. While this shift granted us enhanced accuracy and predictive capabilities, it also diminished our perception of cosmic purpose, that sense of the universe being deliberately fashioned as a dwelling place for consciousness, where every stratum of existence pointed towards inherent meaning. Some individuals have never fully embraced this paradigm shift. Throughout the intervening centuries, they have sought ways to re-establish significance within the cosmos, endeavoring to uncover hidden orders that mainstream science posits do not exist. If you are among such individuals and an interstellar object arrives precisely 704 years after Dante concluded the work that charted these concealed arrangements, you would undoubtedly pay close attention. You would actively search for further correlations, additional alignments, and ponder whether, perhaps, the mystics of the Middle Ages perceived a tangible reality that modern sensibilities have trained us to ignore. You might question whether Paradiso was a descriptive account rather than a product of imagination. Whether Dante actually experienced those spheres through a mode of consciousness now inaccessible to us, and whether he encoded the timing of future celestial events within his verses as a message for those who would be alive when these events transpired. This presents the fundamental challenge in investigating claims such as those surrounding Oumuamua and subsequent observations. They reside at the confluence of historical scholarship, esoteric interpretation, and astronomical observation. Their assertions are difficult to refute precisely because they do not present falsifiable predictions. Instead, they propose narratives that connect disparate pieces of data through interpretive frameworks rather than causal mechanisms. And narratives possess immense power. They are the primary means by which humans comprehend reality. Our innate mode of thought is not mathematical, but storytelling. When someone offers a narrative that reintroduces a sense of cosmic intentionality, suggesting that our species and our civilization hold significance for intelligences beyond Earth, that narrative possesses an emotional allure irrespective of its factual veracity. The 704-year interval might be genuinely significant, or it could be a numerical coincidence derived from calendrical calculations that subsequently acquired importance through retrospective interpretation. Distinguishing between these possibilities would necessitate verifiable evidence. Documented predictions from Dante that subsequently materialized independent corroboration of a cosmically significant event in 1321 that initiated a temporal marker or some conceivable mechanism by which a 14th century poet could ascertain the arrival date of an interstellar object. In the absence of such evidence, we are left with a striking coincidence that could either represent a thread weaving a tapestry of meaning or an arbitrary data point to which we have ascribed excessive importance. What remains undeniable is that Dante meticulously described cosmic geometry and that his work has profoundly influenced the conceptualization of reality for millions. Furthermore, if one is seeking cultural reference points that an observing intelligence might employ to signal recognition, medieval cosmology emerges as a plausible candidate. The great cathedrals were erected according to sacred proportions, and monastic orders meticulously preserved astronomical knowledge through the so-called Dark Ages. The scholars of that era functioned as the scientists of their time, striving to comprehend creation using the available instruments and methodologies. If those methods yielded insights that we have since forgotten, truths that continue to resonate within the universe's structure, even though we now interpret them through a different lens, then revisiting their conceptual frameworks might be more than mere nostalgia or pseudoscience. It could represent the rediscovery of lost knowledge. Alternatively, it might be confirmation bias masquerading as historical inquiry, wherein we find what we desire to find because the alternative, that the cosmos is indifferent and our meanings are self-constructed, is too bleak to contemplate. Both of these possibilities echo across the 7 centuries that separate Dante's quill from the alleged transmissions of Oumuamua and Three-Eyed Atlas, and both will accompany us throughout the remainder of this investigation. Part 7. The Sacred Geometry Bridge. Step into Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, assuming one could have done so prior to the fire, and gaze upward at the rose window adorning the western facade. The stonework artfully divides the circular aperture into 12 primary segments, each further subdivided according to precise mathematical ratios. The overall diameter bears a proportional relationship to the window's distance from the floor, approximating the golden ratio. Light streams through stained glass arranged in patterns that medieval architects believed mirrored the order of the heavens. This was not mere ornamentation. It was theology rendered visible, mathematics given tangible form, an endeavor to fashion earthly spaces that resonated with celestial harmony. The builders were well versed in Euclid and Pythagoras, understanding that certain proportions evoked visual and auditory concord, while others produced dissonance. The very same proportions are discernible in Islamic architecture. The Great Mosque of Cordoba, the Alhambra in Granada, and the Taj Mahal in India all feature geometric designs based on ratios that manifest repeatedly in the natural world. Their tilework exhibits fractal-like repetitions, and their arches are constructed from curves derived from compass and straight-edge constructions. The proportions of their domes reflect not only meticulous calculations of structural integrity and weight distribution, but also symbolic significance. The dome symbolizes the heavens, while the square base represents the earth. The transition between these two forms follows mathematical transformations that medieval engineers understood as sacred. These were not unsophisticated individuals making haphazard guesses. They were accomplished mathematicians operating within cosmological frameworks that harmonized physics, aesthetics, and spirituality. Mayan hieroglyphs and temple alignments reveal a comparable level of sophistication. The pyramid at Chichen Itza, for instance, casts a serpent-shaped shadow during the equinoxes, an effect necessitating precise calculations of angles, dates, and solar positions. The Dresden Codex contains tables of Venus observations so accurate they could predict the planet's appearances decades in advance. These were astronomers who meticulously tracked cycles, identified recurring patterns, and encoded their knowledge in architectural marvels that still stand millennia later. The mathematical principles they employed are identical to those we utilize today, albeit expressed differently and calculated without the aid of computers or telescopes, relying instead on patience and observations spanning multiple generations. What unites these diverse traditions is the recognition that specific ratios are ubiquitous, appearing in music, in patterns of growth, in planetary orbits, and in the human anatomy. The golden ratio, often denoted by the Greek letter phi, appears so consistently that it is tempting to classify it as a universal constant of form. While not a physical constant like the speed of light or the gravitational constant, it represents something perhaps more fundamental, the proportion that emerges when systems achieve optimal efficiency, stability, and beauty. Nautilus shells grow in a golden spiral configuration because this is the most efficient method for adding material while maintaining structural integrity. The spiral arms of galaxies follow the same ratio as density waves propagate through rotating systems. At multiple scales, the universe appears to have discovered the same elegant solution for growth within spatial constraints. If an intelligent civilization from another solar system were to announce its presence, utilizing the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio would be akin to employing a language comprehensible to any technological society. This is not because these numbers are human inventions, but rather because they represent universal discoveries. Mathematics is not arbitrary. The theorems of geometry are consistent everywhere. An alien species, regardless of its biological makeup, chemical composition, or evolutionary trajectory, would still ascertain that the ratio of consecutive Fibonacci numbers converges towards 1.618. They would also discover that this ratio generates the most efficient spirals and observe it within their own world's biological systems and planetary dynamics. It serves as a form of communication that transcends any barrier of time, distance, or form. This is what imbues the claim surrounding Three-Eyed Atlas with such compelling power for those who accept it. The object purportedly chose to communicate through a pattern that is present in sacred architecture across diverse human cultures, underlies natural growth from sunflowers to galaxies, and represents one of the few truly universal discoveries offered by mathematics. If this choice was indeed deliberate, it signifies not merely intelligence but also sophistication. It demonstrates an understanding that effective communication necessitates finding common ground, that announcing oneself involves speaking a vocabulary the recipient already understands. 5, 8, and 13 are not random numbers. They are the introductory phrases of a language that both parties fluently speak, albeit learned from entirely different origins. However, we must exercise caution against excessive spiritualization of these observations. The golden ratio appears in nature due to fundamental physical laws and evolutionary processes, not because the universe is actively conveying aesthetic truths. Spirals form as a result of simultaneous rotation and growth in physical systems. Fibonacci sequences emerge from recursive mathematical rules. These phenomena are consequences of how matter and energy interact, not evidence of conscious design. The presence of similar patterns in human architecture indicates that we observed pre-existing natural phenomena and incorporated them into our constructions because they appeared harmonious, because our visual systems evolved to recognize such harmony, and because structures built to those proportions were more stable and required less material. The concept of sacred geometry holds validity in the sense that the underlying mathematics is undeniably real. Whether it possesses any deeper sacredness remains an open question. If three-eyed Atlas did indeed emit Fibonacci pulses, we are left to ponder. Is it communicating in the language of physics or the language of meaning? It is possible that these two are identical. Mathematics might serve as the conduit between consciousness and the cosmos, a common ground where minds can connect irrespective of their underlying physical substrate or origin. Conversely, we might be projecting human-centric meanings onto natural phenomena that operate according to mathematical rules for purely mechanical reasons, devoid of any conscious intent. The builders of cathedrals believed they were revealing divine order, while modern physicists endeavor to uncover natural laws. Perhaps both perspectives capture a fragment of the truth. It is conceivable that the universe is inherently mathematical in a way that inextricably links consciousness and structure, rendering pattern and meaning as two descriptive facets of the same underlying reality. Alternatively, we might still be engaged in the age-old human practice of observing the stars and perceiving our own reflections. We might be hearing echoes of our own questions within the cosmic silence, finding in the majestic spirals of galaxies confirmation of patterns we already deemed significant. The geometry itself is undeniable, and the spirals exist. Whether they serve as a bridge connecting human culture to alien intelligence, or merely link human observation to human interpretation, will depend on evidence yet to be acquired. Nevertheless, this conceptual bridge stands, spanning the chasm between our medieval cathedrals and the alleged signals from an interstellar visitor, connecting geometric principles across 8 centuries and trillions of miles. Part 8. The Physics That Shouldn't Be. The prevailing scientific model describes comets as essentially dirty snowballs. These are nuclei composed of ice mixed with rock and organic compounds, typically a few kilometers in diameter, remnants from the solar system's formation approximately 4.6 billion years ago. Most comets reside for eons in the Oort cloud, a vast spherical shell of frozen objects encircling the Sun at distances measured in thousands of astronomical units. Occasionally, gravitational influences from passing stars or massive molecular clouds perturb these objects, initiating their inward trajectory. They embark on a lengthy descent toward the inner solar system, accelerating as the Sun's gravitational pull intensifies. Upon crossing the orbit of Jupiter, solar heating becomes a significant factor, causing the ice to sublimate. This sublimation releases jets of gas and dust that are invariably directed away from the Sun, propelled by solar wind and radiation pressure. This phenomenon creates the characteristic cometary tail, which can extend millions of miles behind the comet as it orbits the Sun. This is the standard behavior, what we anticipate from natural celestial bodies. However, reports from amateur observers and analysts, such as David Sereda, suggest that three-eyed Atlas does not entirely conform to this pattern. Some observers claim to have detected a jet emanating towards the Sun, indicating material moving in the opposite direction of sublimation's typical outflow. This would contravene fundamental physics unless some active propulsion mechanism is at play, directing material in a manner that simple sublimation cannot explain. While natural outgassing can produce jets at various angles, depending on the comet's rotation and subsurface ice distribution, sustained sunward jets are not physically plausible due to the lack of any force counteracting radiation pressure in that direction. Furthermore, compositional analysis presents intriguing data. Spectroscopic examination of comets typically reveals the presence of water ice, carbon dioxide ice, ammonia, methane, and silicate dust, essentially a primordial mixture from the solar nebula, flash frozen and preserved for billions of years. Some reports indicate that Three-Eyed Atlas exhibits unusual spectral signatures, including a high nickel content and low iron ratios, which deviate from typical cometary compositions. Nickel-rich objects are generally associated with metallic asteroids, fragments originating from the cores of protoplanets that differentiated while molten and were subsequently shattered in ancient collisions. Discovering a high nickel content in an interstellar object would be noteworthy but not inherently impossible. However, finding it in conjunction with cometary activity, low iron, and potential sunward jets begins to paint a picture of an object that defies easy categorization. It is crucial to emphasize the current status of this evidence. These claims have not been substantiated by peer-reviewed scientific analysis. NASA and the International Astronomical Union have not released data that confirms unusual composition or anomalous jet directions for Three-Eyed Atlas. What we possess are accounts from individuals, some of whom possess credentials and access to amateur telescope networks, and some with a history of making extraordinary assertions that, without independent verification from multiple professional observatories utilizing calibrated instruments and standardized analytical techniques, have not always proven accurate. We cannot presently treat these reports as established facts. They are certainly intriguing and contribute to a broader narrative of anomaly and mystery, but they do not constitute proof. Nevertheless, the possibility that Three-Eyed Atlas is physically anomalous warrants thorough investigation. If it is indeed an interstellar object, it originated from another solar system formed under conditions that might differ significantly from those present in our solar nebula. Variations in stellar metallicity, protoplanetary disk compositions, and thermal histories could all contribute to the formation of objects with compositions that appear unusual to us. The very fact of its interstellar origin already renders it extraordinary. Only two other confirmed interstellar objects have traversed our solar system: Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. Both exhibited peculiar characteristics. Oumuamua displayed non-gravitational acceleration that could not be entirely accounted for by outgassing. Borisov presented an unusually high ratio of carbon monoxide. These are objects from alien solar systems. We should expect them to be peculiar. However, there is a distinction between inherent strangeness and deliberate engineering. A sunward jet implies active propulsion, not a passive response to solar heating. A high nickel content coupled with low iron suggests a deliberate composition, possibly indicative of manufactured materials rather than naturally occurring rock. If one were designing a probe for interstellar travel, considerations would include optimizing for structural integrity, radiation resistance, and minimal mass. A nickel-based alloy might prove advantageous. Propulsion would be necessary for trajectory adjustments, for decelerating upon arrival at a target system, and for maneuvering to specific positions at precise times. Sunward jets would be logical for trajectory trimming or for slowing down to match the orbital velocities of planets targeted for observation. Each anomaly, when considered in isolation, might possess a natural explanation. However, when viewed collectively, they begin to suggest an object that behaves more like a spacecraft than a simple snowball. This is the essence of the probe hypothesis, which has been discussed since the discovery of Oumuamua. Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb proposed that Oumuamua's non-gravitational acceleration could be explained if it were a light sail, a thin reflective structure propelled by radiation pressure, potentially of artificial origin. The mainstream astronomical community strongly resisted this notion, arguing that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and that we should avoid premature conclusions about alien artifacts when natural explanations might still be forthcoming. Loeb countered that science exhibits a bias against considering artificial explanations, suggesting that we are so conditioned to seek natural causes that we may overlook genuine technosignatures when they appear. This debate continues without a definitive resolution, with both sides accusing the other of inherent bias. If Three-Eyed Atlas is indeed a probe, it represents a more advanced construct than Oumuamua. It is not merely passing through on a hyperbolic trajectory. It is potentially signaling, potentially synchronizing its arrival, and potentially maneuvering. This implies active operation, which in turn suggests either onboard intelligence or remote control, implying the continued presence of someone directing it, observing us, and waiting to see if we recognize their actions. The level of control required for such a feat is extraordinary. The energy expenditure for an interstellar journey is immense. Accelerating even a small probe to velocities capable of traversing light years within a reasonable time frame necessitates power sources far beyond our current capabilities. Decelerating at the destination requires an equivalent amount of energy. Maintaining functionality over journeys that could span thousands or millions of years necessitates engineering capable of withstanding radiation impacts and component degradation without repair. Alternatively, it might not be a probe at all. It could simply be an unusual rock from a peculiar solar system, and we might once again be engaging in pattern-seeking, perceiving design where only unusual chemistry and coincidental timing exist. The universe is vast, containing trillions of stars, each potentially orbited by planets and debris. The spectrum of potential celestial bodies is vast. Our exploration has so far encompassed a minuscule fraction of objects within our own solar neighborhood, alongside 2.5 definitively identified extraterrestrial visitors. Drawing definitive conclusions about what constitutes ordinary versus manufactured from such a limited dataset is imprudent. We require more empirical evidence, enhanced observational capabilities, and a greater number of interstellar entities to establish reliable benchmarks before we can confidently ascertain anything as unusual. However, this brings us back to the perplexing communication disruptions. The very instruments capable of furnishing this essential data were rendered inoperable. The crucial observations that would have permitted precise compositional analysis, accurate tracking of propulsive jet trajectories, and detailed mapping of the object's path to detect non-gravitational acceleration either were not undertaken or have not been disseminated. We are consequently left with incomplete accounts, informal reports, and assertions that lack verification due to the incapacitation of the necessary corroboration systems. Whether the physical characteristics of 3 Atlas defy naturalistic explanations remains unresolved. What is indisputable is the immense significance of its physics. For if this entity is indeed of artificial construction, if it is under active direction, if it is purposefully transmitting a signal, then our endeavor shifts from investigating an astronomical anomaly to documenting humanity's inaugural encounter with another intelligence. Part 9. Cosmic Silence or Suppression. In 1969, NASA successfully placed humans on the lunar surface, broadcasting this monumental achievement live to an eager global audience. The imagery transmitted was converted from the high-fidelity format captured at the tracking stations into standard broadcast television resolution for wider distribution. The original high-definition magnetic tapes were intended for permanent archival. Instead, they were mislabeled, improperly stored, and ultimately re-recorded to conserve resources during a tape scarcity in the early 1980s. For decades, the most pristine visual record of humankind's paramount space exploration triumph was lost. This was not a consequence of deliberate sabotage, but rather of bureaucratic oversight, fiscal constraints, and inadequate archival protocols, such as the manner in which institutions often manage invaluable information. Sometimes data is lost not through malice, but through sheer incompetence and insufficient resources. Space agencies operate under constrained budgets, with aging infrastructure, and are inundated with enormous volumes of data. Every satellite generates gigabytes of imagery daily. Every deep space probe transmits measurements that necessitate storage, cataloging, processing, and analysis. The intricate workflow from raw instrument readings to published scientific findings involves numerous stages. These include initial quality assessments, the elimination of instrumental errors, calibration against established standards, peer review, and embargo periods during which researchers prepare their papers. Data can languish within this system for months or even years before becoming publicly accessible. Occasionally, it never surfaces, either because no one with access feels compelled to compile it, or because it is classified for national security imperatives, or because it reveals findings that agencies would prefer to keep out of public discourse. Let us return to our chronological sequence. Psyche ceased transmissions on September 1st through the 5th. The officially stated reason is a safety mode initiated by onboard anomaly detection. Safety mode is a legitimate function, a protective state where spacecraft systems are deactivated, awaiting ground commands to resume normal operations. Such occurrences are not uncommon. However, its activation during a period when multiple celestial bodies were aligned in noteworthy geometric configurations, coinciding with an interstellar visitor's approach to the inner solar system, introduces a degree of synchronicity that prompts scrutiny. Was the safety mode triggered by something Psyche observed? Was it witnessing something that NASA wished to remain unobserved? Or was it, in reality, a mere technical malfunction whose timing coincidentally appears significant because we are predisposed to perceive patterns? HiRise went offline on October 1st. The camera's functionality had been deteriorating since 2023, a fact duly documented in mission reports. Charge-coupled device sensors degrade gradually in the vacuum of space. Individual pixels fail. Electronic components drift. Ultimately, the cumulative damage renders the instrument inoperable. This represents typical operational aging. However, the cessation of activity on October 1st places the failure precisely 12 days prior to the anniversary of the Fatima event, precisely 12 days before the purported Fibonacci pulses. The camera, which could have captured images of Mars with unprecedented clarity during a critical window when 3 Atlas was traversing that sector of the solar system, abruptly ceased functioning. Coincidence or convenient timing? Subsequently, on October 13th, the Solar Dynamics Observatory underwent scheduled maintenance. Satellites do indeed require periodic upkeep. Software is updated, instruments are recalibrated, and orbital parameters are adjusted. The scheduling of such work, often months in advance, is standard procedure. Nevertheless, maintenance coinciding precisely with an event that could be interpreted as initial contact appears suspicious, particularly when the agency fails to provide a detailed justification for selecting that specific day for that particular task. Perhaps it was an arbitrary decision, perhaps it was necessitated by technical requirements, or perhaps an assessment of predicted events, for that day led to the decision to disable the feed. If one intends to suppress information concerning an anomalous celestial occurrence, several strategies are available. Data can be immediately classified, designated top secret, and routed through intelligence channels rather than scientific ones. This approach has been employed previously with certain observations from reconnaissance satellites. Alternatively, release can be indefinitely postponed. Considerations such as ongoing analysis, staffing shortages, budgetary limitations, or data embargoes can delay public access for years in specific domains. Another option is to release the data itself, but withhold the analytical tools necessary for its interpretation, thereby restricting the pool of individuals capable of effectively utilizing it. Or one can ensure that the instruments are not actively observing in the first place by scheduling maintenance or experiencing fortuitous malfunctions during critical periods. Each of these methods has historical precedent for various reasons. The pertinent question is whether any of these tactics were applied in the case of 3 Atlas. There is no publicly available evidence to suggest such actions. No whistleblowers have come forward with classified data sets, nor have any leaked documents indicated a concerted effort to suppress observations. The communication blackouts possess official explanations that align with routine operational procedures. However, the absence of evidence does not equate to evidence of absence, particularly when investigating potential clandestine activities by entities possessing the resources and authority to effectively classify information. If data were indeed captured and subsequently classified, we might not necessarily become aware of it. Those with access would be bound by security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. The institutional imperative would likely be to maintain the facade of normal operations publicly while managing extraordinary findings privately. This mirrors patterns observed in the discourse surrounding unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and UFOs. For decades, military and intelligence agencies denied the existence of serious programs investigating unidentified aerial phenomena. Then, in 2021, official reports confirmed the existence of such programs, acknowledging that trained observers had documented objects exhibiting maneuvers surpassing known technological capabilities, and that the government considered these reports sufficiently credible to allocate resources for their investigation. The public narrative evolved from outright denial and dismissal of witnesses as mistaken or dishonest to an admission of their existence, coupled with an assertion of ignorance regarding their nature and an ongoing investigation. This shift did not occur because the phenomena themselves changed, but rather because the institutional willingness to acknowledge them evolved. Could a similar paradigm be applicable to 3 Atlas? An object exhibiting characteristics indicative of artificial origin, arriving on a date of symbolic significance, and potentially communicating through mathematical sequences, would precisely represent the kind of phenomenon an agency might opt to handle discreetly while publicly presenting routine operations. This would not necessarily stem from malevolence, but rather from a precautionary stance. First contact protocols, if they exist, likely mandate verification, analysis, consideration of societal implications, and a controlled disclosure rather than immediate public dissemination. The limited number of individuals privy to such information would be operating under constraints beyond ordinary comprehension. They might genuinely believe that maintaining silence is the responsible course of action, even if it causes frustration for those outside the inner circle. Alternatively, there might be no extraordinary information to disclose. The communication outages could indeed be purely coincidental. The observations that were made might reveal nothing out of the ordinary. Consequently, the assertions made by observers might stem from misinterpretations or flawed data. Our investigation delves into the realm of absence, shadows, and the voids between official accounts and what might have transpired. Absence is inherently difficult to substantiate. One cannot definitively prove the existence of something when the evidence for it is, by definition, missing or classified. All that can be done is to identify patterns, pose inquiries, and persistently advocate for transparency from institutions that have valid reasons for maintaining opacity. What we can assert with certainty is that the data pipeline is of paramount importance. The trajectory of observations from instruments to scientists and ultimately to the public dictates which realities become widely accepted and which remain subjects of contention. When this pipeline experiences disruptions during critical intervals, whether intentional or not, it engenders informational asymmetries that erode trust. Even if no extraordinary event occurred, the mere perception that something extraordinary may have happened and was subsequently concealed becomes a reality in itself, influencing how individuals interpret future occurrences and their confidence in official narratives. The silence surrounding 3 Atlas, whether cosmic in origin or institutional in nature, is now an integral component of the narrative we endeavor to comprehend. Part 10. The Psychology of Fibonacci Fever. On August 15, 1977, at 23 minutes past 11 p.m., the Big Ear Radio Telescope at Ohio State University detected a robust, narrow-band signal lasting 72 seconds, precisely matching the anticipated signature of an artificial transmission originating from deep space. The signal was so potent, so distinctly different from ambient background noise, that astronomer Jerry Eamon circled it on the printout, annotating it with the exclamatory word, "Wow." This appellation has persisted, the "Wow" signal. Subsequent searches of the same celestial region on following nights, months, and years yielded no results. There was no repeat transmission, nor any discernible explanation. To this day, it remains one of the most compelling candidate signals in the history of SETI research, and concurrently, one of the most perplexing due to its singular occurrence. Such is the nature of anomaly detection in astronomy. An extraordinary observation is made once, and then it vanishes. Was it genuine? Was it an instrumental error? Was it interference from a passing satellite or a terrestrial transmitter? Was it a natural astrophysical burst that mimicked an artificial signal? Without repeatability, without confirmation from multiple instruments, certainty remains elusive. Science fundamentally requires reproducibility. Singular observations, however striking, do not constitute proof. They represent curiosities, subjects warranting investigation, but they cannot be accepted as established phenomena until independently corroborated. The human brain did not evolve to navigate such ambiguity. Our ancestors evolved on ancient savannas where pattern recognition was essential for survival. The rustling in the undergrowth could be the wind or a predator. A shadow on the path might be a fallen branch or a venomous snake. Erring in one direction led to unnecessary alarm and wasted energy. Erring in the other could result in being consumed. Natural selection strongly favored a predisposition for false positives over false negatives in threat detection. It was more advantageous to perceive 10 patterns that were not present than to miss the single one that was. This cognitive bias, this inclination to discern patterns even within randomness, is termed apophenia. It is an intrinsic facet of our neural architecture, incapable of being switched off. Fibonacci sequences are particularly susceptible to apophenia because they genuinely manifest across a wide array of natural phenomena. They can be observed in the arrangement of flower petals, in the branching patterns of trees, in the spiral formations of hurricanes, and in the proportions of financial markets. This pervasive presence means that if one actively seeks Fibonacci sequences, one will inevitably find them, irrespective of whether their appearance in a particular context carries genuine significance. The sequence itself is real. The question then becomes whether its manifestation in any given situation signifies intentional design, an inherent natural law, or a coincidental alignment of frequently occurring patterns. Consider the star designated Tabby, officially catalogued as KIC 8462852. In 2015, an analysis of data from the Kepler Space Telescope revealed that this star exhibited peculiar dimming patterns, losing as much as 22% of its light at irregular intervals. Standard planetary transits cause a star to dim by 1% or less and follow predictable schedules. The dimming observed in Tabby's star was unlike anything previously witnessed. One hypothesis, proposed by astronomer Jason Wright, suggested the possibility of a Dyson sphere or a similar megastructure constructed by an advanced civilization to harness stellar energy. This concept captured the public imagination, leading to widespread media coverage proclaiming the potential discovery of alien megastructures. SETI initiatives redirected radio telescopes toward the star. Subsequently, further analysis revealed a naturalistic explanation, a disk of dust and debris, possibly originating from a disrupted comet, passing in front of the star at unpredictable intervals. The megastructure hypothesis gradually faded, supplanted by conventional astrophysics. This recurring pattern is evident throughout the history of SETI research. Fast radio bursts, upon their initial detection, appeared to be artificial in origin, characterized by precise durations, immense energies, and the absence of any obvious natural source. It is now understood that these are likely flares from magnetars. Pulsars, a natural but exotic phenomenon, were briefly classified as LGM-1, little green men, in 1967 due to their remarkable regularity, which seemed too perfect to be a natural occurrence. It was later determined that they are rotating neutron stars, a natural yet extraordinary celestial object. The anomalous acceleration observed with Oumuamua was significant enough to prompt hypotheses of artificial origin. Ongoing analyses suggest that cometary outgassing, combined with its unusual shape, can account for the majority of the observations, although debates persist. Time and again, we encounter patterns that appear designed, triggering our intelligence detection mechanisms, only to later find natural processes that generate these patterns without the involvement of consciousness. Does this imply that every anomaly should be dismissed as apophenia, and that natural explanations will eventually emerge for all unusual phenomena? Such an approach would constitute the inverse error. Scientific progress hinges on taking anomalies seriously, investigating them thoroughly, and entertaining multiple hypotheses until empirical evidence decisively favors one over the others. To dismiss the claim of Fibonacci pulses without investigation, based solely on the statistical likelihood that most SETI candidates prove to be natural, would be as biased as accepting it outright due to a desire for confirmation of extraterrestrial contact. The appropriate methodology is skeptical inquiry. The claim should be treated as a hypothesis to be rigorously tested, rather than an assertion to be defended or a delusion to be ridiculed. Therefore, let us examine it from a psychological perspective. If one were tasked with designing a first contact signal, would Fibonacci be a logical choice? Yes, for all the reasons previously discussed. It is universal, recognizable, demonstrates mathematical sophistication, and appears in both natural and technological contexts. It represents the kind of pattern that would immediately engage human pattern recognition systems. An engineer aiming to attract our attention could scarcely select a better option. However, this is precisely what makes it problematic from the standpoint of potential false positives. Because it functions so effectively as a signal, we are predisposed to interpret it as such, even when it occurs naturally. The very ubiquity that renders Fibonacci an advantageous choice for communication also makes it a poor discriminator between intentional and accidental patterns. Consider the following thought experiment. Imagine you are monitoring space and detect 5 pulses from an object, followed by 8, then 13. Your brain immediately flags this as a Fibonacci sequence. You become excited and begin searching for corroborating evidence of other anomalies that support the interpretation that this is a designed signal. You discover compositional peculiarities, coincidences in blackout timings, and connections to historical anniversaries. Each additional piece of evidence strengthens your conviction that you have stumbled upon something extraordinary. Now ask yourself, if the 5-8-13 sequence were purely coincidental, would you still find supporting evidence? Would your pattern-seeking brain still locate compositional oddities, timing coincidences, and historical connections. Because that is precisely what human brains do when convinced they are on the verge of a significant discovery, the answer is almost certainly yes. Confirmation bias ensures that once a hypothesis is adopted, evidence supporting it is selectively attended to, while contradictory evidence is minimized. This is not indicative of foolishness or delusion. It is a manifestation of human cognitive processes. Every scientist grapples with this phenomenon. The solution lies in systematic methodology. Hypotheses should be pre-registered. Blind analysis should be employed whenever feasible. Independent replication should be a requirement. Submissions should undergo peer review by individuals incentivized to identify errors. These safeguards exist precisely because individual human judgment is fallible when pattern recognition aligns with personal desire. We lack these safeguards in the case of 3 Atlas because the primary data is either unavailable or unverified. We are working with second-hand accounts, gaps in observational coverage, and a narrative constructed by researchers who are already convinced that something extraordinary has occurred. This does not invalidate their findings, but rather indicates that we are in the initial, complex phase of investigation, where signal and noise remain intertwined, where genuine discovery and wishful thinking bear a resemblance, and where the narrative is compelling enough to warrant further inquiry, but not sufficiently robust to draw definitive conclusions. The psychology of Fibonacci fever, the immediate association of the sequence 5813 with a message, serves as both our greatest asset and our most significant liability in the quest for cosmic intelligence. It means we will notice patterns that may indeed be signals. It also means we will pursue phantoms, expend resources on false positives, and occasionally subject ourselves to embarrassment through premature announcements. The critical task is to maintain a dynamic equilibrium, remaining open to extraordinary possibilities while demanding extraordinary evidence, recognizing patterns while questioning their inherent meaning, and perpetually assessing whether our desire for contact is unduly influencing our interpretation of the data more than the data itself is shaping our beliefs. Part 11. The Strange Quark Plasma at CERN. 2,500 feet beneath the border separating Switzerland and France, protons are accelerated in a 17-meter ring to 99.9999% of the speed of light. Upon collision within the detectors of the Large Hadron Collider, these protons release energies that have not naturally existed in the universe since the microseconds following the Big Bang. Matter vaporizes into its constituent quarks and gluons, forming a state known as quark-gluon plasma, a primordial soup that permeated the entire cosmos before it cooled sufficiently for protons and neutrons to coalesce. Physicists at CERN study this plasma to deepen their understanding of the fundamental forces governing matter and to test theories concerning the universe's evolution, from perfect symmetry to the structured complexity we inhabit. In October of 2025, results published from recent collision experiments revealed an unexpected behavior within the quark-gluon plasma. The plasma was flowing in patterns inconsistent with standard hydrodynamic models. Instead of behaving as a simple fluid with uniform characteristics, it displayed structure, exhibiting vortices and flows that suggested additional degrees of freedom, or hidden variables, influencing the interactions of quarks and gluons at extreme densities. The physics community is proceeding with caution, conducting further collisions, verifying calibrations, and ensuring that this is not an instrumental artifact. However, if the anomaly persists, it implies that our comprehension of matter at its most fundamental level is incomplete, and that new physics lies latent within the plasma, awaiting decipherment. Why is this relevant to our investigation of 3 Atlas? Because we may be experiencing a period where hidden patterns are revealing themselves across multiple scales concurrently. At the particle physics scale, the smallest we can probe, quark-gluon plasma exhibits unexpected structure. At the cosmic scale, the largest we observe, an interstellar object is potentially communicating through mathematical patterns. Between these extremes lies the entirety of what we believe to be reality: atoms, chemistry, biology, planets, stars, and galaxies. If two distinct indicators simultaneously exhibit deviations, it prompts contemplation regarding whether a fundamental shift is underway. Could we be entering an era where the cosmos communicates with greater clarity, revealing insights previously overlooked due to an incomplete perspective or mistimed observation? This notion is admittedly theoretical, as no apparent mechanism links the behavior of quark-gluon plasma at CERN with the pulse sequences emanating from an interstellar comet. These represent disparate phenomena governed by distinct physical laws operating at different energy levels. However, the annals of scientific history demonstrate that significant advancements often materialize in rapid succession. Quantum mechanics, relativity, and nuclear physics all emerged within a few decades of each other in the early 20th century. This convergence was not due to a cosmic alteration, but rather to the simultaneous maturation of experimental capabilities and theoretical frameworks reaching critical junctures. Instrumentation attained sufficient sophistication to probe regimes that exposed the limitations of classical physics. Concurrently, mathematicians developed the intricate tools necessary to articulate the observations made by physicists. These discoveries fueled one another, initiating a cascade of revelation. Might we be experiencing a comparable moment now? Instruments have achieved unprecedented levels of precision. The James Webb Space Telescope gazes upon the universe's nascent galaxies. Gravitational wave detectors register the collisions of black holes billions of light years distant. The Event Horizon Telescope captures images of the event horizon itself. Particle accelerators delve into energies approaching the Planck scale. Artificial intelligence systems process data volumes that would occupy human researchers for lifetimes. Our capacity for observation, measurement, and computation surpasses any prior point in human history. If the universe harbors discernible patterns, our current preparedness to uncover them is unparalleled. And if these patterns manifest across multiple scales, it would be logical for them to emerge concurrently in diverse fields as various instruments achieve critical sensitivity thresholds. The anomaly observed in quark-gluon plasma could potentially connect with cosmic signals through the medium of fundamental mathematics. Both instances involve discernible patterns and structures arising from what would ostensibly be simpler systems. Quark-gluon plasma is expected to behave as a near-ideal fluid, possessing such minimal viscosity that standard hydrodynamic equations should accurately predict its flow. Instead, it exhibits complexity and structure, behaviors that suggest deeper governing principles for the interactions of fundamental particles under extreme conditions. Similarly, if Comet Three-Eyed Atlas possesses a natural origin, it ought to exhibit characteristics typical of other comets, such as chaotic outgassing, random jetting, and a composition aligned with the conditions of solar system formation. Instead, it purportedly displays structure and patterned timing, hinting at a more profound organizational framework dictating its behavior. In both scenarios, we are potentially witnessing evidence that reality is more organized, structured, and perhaps even intentional than reductionist physics suggests. Alternatively, we might be observing noise that appears as a signal due to a collective yearning for cosmic meaning. The findings concerning quark-gluon plasma are preliminary and may be subject to revision with more extensive data, refined analysis, or a clearer understanding of detector responses. The history of science is replete with anomalies that dissolved under scrutiny, measurements later revealed as systematic errors, and patterns that proved to be artifacts of the measurement process rather than inherent features of the phenomena under investigation. Cold fusion, faster-than-light neutrinos, and the elusive pentaquark initially seemed like revolutionary discoveries before being explained away or dismissed. Extraordinary claims within physics are subjected to exceptionally rigorous scrutiny, precisely because the ease of error far outweighs the difficulty of achieving accuracy. Nevertheless, let us momentarily entertain the possibility that both anomalies are genuine. What would be the implication if quark-gluon plasma displayed unexpected structure and an interstellar object exhibited mathematical signaling? It would suggest that organization, pattern formation, and information processing capabilities might be more foundational to physics than currently understood. Modern physics typically regards information as a secondary attribute that emerges from matter and energy in accordance with dynamical laws. However, some theoretical physicists propose the inverse, that information is primary, the universe is fundamentally computational, and what we perceive as physical laws are, in fact, algorithms executing on an as-yet unidentified substrate. From this perspective, particles are not merely miniature billiard balls following trajectories, but rather information states evolving according to specific rules. Matter, in this view, is simply the manifestation of information organizing itself into stable patterns. If information is fundamental, then pattern generation and recognition become universal principles rather than mere biological coincidences. Fibonacci sequences might not appear in nature solely due to mechanical growth rules, but because the universe's information processing architecture inherently favors certain recursive structures. Intelligence might not arise accidentally from sufficiently complex neural networks, but rather inevitably, as it represents the outcome when information systems reach critical complexity thresholds. Communication between intelligences would then be not a rare occurrence contingent on specific technological development, but a natural consequence of information-rich systems interacting across space and time. This delves into highly speculative theoretical domains, yet it aligns with the direction of cutting-edge physics and cosmology. Quantum information theory, holographic principles, and computational universe models all propose that information may be more fundamental than matter. If this premise holds true, then observing mathematical patterns simultaneously across multiple scales would not be a coincidence. It would serve as evidence that we are finally acquiring the conceptual and technological tools to perceive what has always been present. The universe as organized information, consciousness as localized information processing, communication as information transfer, and signals like the purported Fibonacci pulses as one information system reaching out to another across the vastness of space. The anomaly at CERN and the signal from Three-Eyed Atlas might be linked not by a direct physical mechanism, but conceptually. Both represent instances where patterns emerge in systems where simpler behavior was anticipated. Both challenge reductionist models that assume complex phenomena can be explained by deconstructing them into simpler components governed by simple rules. Both invite consideration of whether organization and structure are intrinsic to physical law rather than accidental byproducts of initial conditions. Crucially, both are occurring at a juncture when our civilization has only just developed the capacity to detect them. A century prior, we would have been incapable of constructing the Large Hadron Collider or tracking interstellar objects with sufficient accuracy. A century hence, assuming our survival, we will look back at this period and either perceive it as the genesis of a profound paradigm shift or as another false dawn in the long history of pattern-seeking primates misinterpreting noise for signal. Analysis of the quark-gluon plasma is ongoing. Research papers are being drafted. The peer review process is advancing. Reproducibility is being rigorously tested. By the time this investigation concludes, we will possess more data. Either the anomaly will persist, revolutionizing our understanding of matter, or it will dissipate, joining the extensive list of preliminary findings that ultimately failed to materialize. However, at this precise moment in October 2025, it exists in a state of superposition, simultaneously representing evidence of new physics and a potential instrumental artifact, much like the Fibonacci pulses from Three-Eyed Atlas, which exist in a state of superposition between initial detection and wishful interpretation. We perpetually inhabit this phase of uncertainty preceding resolution. While uncomfortable, it is precisely within this interstitial space between observation and comprehension that discovery takes place. Part 12. Solar Maximum Surprises. The Sun operates on an 11-year cycle, its magnetic field waxing and waning, reversing polarity, and driving the emergence and disappearance of sunspots on its surface. Solar minimum is characterized by quiescence, with few sunspots, infrequent flares, and reduced radiation. Solar maximum, conversely, is a period of intense activity, where the sun's surface erupts with magnetic phenomena. Flares unleash colossal bursts of X-rays and particles. Coronal mass ejections propel billions of tons of plasma into space at speeds reaching millions of miles per hour. We are currently approaching solar maximum within cycle 25, and it is proving to be more energetic than anticipated. Initial models suggested a relatively subdued maximum, comparable to the preceding cycle. Instead, we are witnessing sunspot counts and flare frequencies that surpass projections, indicating that the sun still harbors unforeseen phenomena that our current models have yet to encompass. Coronal mass ejections, or CMEs, represent the most dramatic solar events. A substantial magnetic structure becomes unstable and erupts, ejecting a bubble of plasma and magnetic field away from the sun. Should this bubble be directed towards Earth and arrive when our planet lies within its trajectory days later, the consequences can be significant. The plasma interacts with Earth's magnetosphere, compressing it, inducing currents in the ionosphere, generating magnificent auroras at high latitudes, and potentially causing damage to satellites, power grids, and communication systems.